Today I'm going to talk about the use of the aids, and I've got my buddy Moshe here back with me again to help demonstrate the use of the aids, and I want to tell you why it's important to you in order to be very, very clear about the aids, what each of your aids controls, and how each of the actions of the aids create different effects in the horse's body. The reason it's important is what you're doing when you train, and I'm really talking about any kind of training, not just dressage, any kind of training, is you're developing a non-verbal language. And this is how I want you to think about it. If I only spoke English and you spoke to me in Russian, I wouldn't have a clue what you were saying to me. And even if you spoke more slowly, I still wouldn't understand what you were saying to me. And if you got frustrated and started shouting at me in Russian, I still wouldn't understand because I don't speak Russian. And this is what happens sometimes when we think that our horses aren't doing what we want them to do. We start applying the aids harder and harder and basically shouting with our aids, thinking that turning up the volume on the aids and being more aggressive and applying them harder and stronger is going to help the horse to understand. Well, if he doesn't speak the language that you're speaking to him, if he doesn't understand that language, turning up the volume isn't going to make any difference. So what we need to do is think about how we learn any foreign language. In order for me to understand you in Russian, first I need to know the Russian alphabet. I need to know the letters of the alphabet. And once I know the letters of the alphabet, then we can put those letters of the alphabet together to form words, and then those words together to form sentences. So in today's session, we're going to talk about the letters of the alphabet and what each of them are and how they affect the horse. And basically, we're going to talk about three different sets of aids: your seat, your legs, and your reins. And I'm purposely doing the three sets of aids in that order because when you finally put the letters of the alphabet together to form words, I want you to always think in that order. Seat first, then legs, and lastly reins. That's how you should prioritize the use of the aids. And so let's talk about the seat first, and then we'll talk about cause and effect. But first you need to know the things that the seat controls. The seat controls four things. The seat controls rhythm, speed, length of stride, and all downward transitions. And it's very, very important that you develop kind of a knee-jerk reaction whenever you think about steadying the rhythm, increasing the speed, which is also tempo, or slowing down the speed, increasing the length of stride, or decreasing the length of stride, or doing any downward transitions. You need to develop a knee-jerk reaction to automatically go to your seat because, unfortunately, you can control all of those things with the reins. And if you do those things with the reins, you do them at the expense of the hind legs. You stop the hind legs from coming forward, and that's something that we never want to do. So we always want to think, whenever we adjust rhythm, speed, length of stride, or all down transitions, that we do it from the seat. Now, first I want to talk about the passive following seat. When you use, and I'll demonstrate that in a second, when you use a passive following seat, your seat just goes with, and just follows along the movement of the horse. And basically, that just tells him to keep doing what he's doing, to stay in the same rhythm, to stay in the same tempo, and to stay in the same length of stride. We also have what's called a driving seat, and people describe the driving seat in any number of ways. I'll give you a few, and you pick the one that works best for you. Sometimes people say when they use a driving seat, they think about pushing the back of the saddle toward the front of the saddle, pushing the cantle toward the pommel. Other times people think about cleaning their saddle and polishing their saddle with a wipe of the sponge from back to front. The image I personally like best is I remember when I was a little kid and I was sitting on a swing set and I wanted to swing higher. I'd give a push with my seat in order to get the seat to go higher. So that's the action of your driving seat. And that asks the horse to go more forward or to increase his tempo. Then we also have what's called a retarding or a stilled seat. And when you use your stilled seat, first you need to make sure you're stretching up very tall so that you have a gentle curve in the small of your back, so you have what I call a ready back. Because if you're sitting like this, all slouched over, even if you used your your retarding seat, your stilled seat, your horse wouldn't be able to feel it. So you stretch up tall, you have a gentle curve in the small of your back, and when you go to use your retarding seat, you tighten your tummy muscles like you're doing a sit-up. And this causes you to brace your lower back and your hips stop following the movement of the horse. Now, to the degree that you hold your retarding seat, you're either telling the horse to steady his rhythm or to shorten his stride, or if you hold it even longer, you're telling him to drop down and do a downward transition. This also slows tempo, I should say. So those are the three kinds of seats, and I'm just going to demonstrate them here for a moment in the walk. So now I have what's called a passive following seat. My seat is just going with the motion of Moshi's walk. And so that just tells him to keep doing exactly what he's doing. In a moment, I'm going to stretch up and tighten my stomach muscles and use my retarding seat. And I'm just going to use it a little bit just to tell him to shorten his strides and to slow his tempo. So I stretch up. There we go. And notice I'm not using the reins. Eventually I will use the reins, but I will use them for other things. I'm going to do that again for you in a second. First I'm going to walk on. And I'm just going to use my passive following seat to tell him to keep marching on. And then I'm going to stretch up, hold my tummy muscles, and you see he slows his tempo and shortens his stride. Now, if I hold that retarding seat longer than that, I'm asking him to do a down transition. Remember, that's one of the things that your seat controls. So, when I'm broadside to the camera again, I'm going to stretch up, I'm going to hold my tummy muscles in exactly the same way. Watch that I don't use any reins. And I'm going to ask him to step to the halt, no reins. Now, when you're first teaching your horse to respond to any of these seat aids, you have to remember your horse was not born knowing any of these aids. So you want to combine each of these new letters of the alphabet with an English word that your horse should know from his work on the lunge line. He should know words like slow, words like walk, trot, canter, hoe, and of course he should know good boy. So if I wanted him to halt and he didn't understand my seat, I would stretch up, tighten my tummy muscles and say, whoa. And then, of course, I would praise him. Eventually, you won't have to use your voice command, but that's a way that you can make a link between what you're doing with your seat and what you want the horse to do. So we have the passive following seat, and we've just talked about the retarding or the stilled seat to slow tempo, shorten stride, or do all down transitions. Now I'm going to give a push with my seat in order to ask him to go more forward, to take longer strides, and to quicken his tempo. I'm going to use my retarding seat to slow him down a little bit again, so that you can see the little push from my seat when I ask him to increase his tempo and take a longer stride. Okay, and that was a little bit of an overreaction, but you get the idea. I'm going to slow him down again, and a push with my seat. And if your horse doesn't understand that, you can say walk on or trot on or give him a little touch with the stick while you use your driving seat until he makes the link. This is how horses learn. They link things together. Now, those are the things that your seat controls, your passive following seat, your retarding seat, and your driving seat. But before I go on to the legs, I want to talk a little bit about your body, because your seat is part of your body. And you need to understand that the position of your body controls the position of the horse's body. And basically, your shoulders should always be parallel to the horse's shoulders, and your hips always parallel to the horse's hips. So kind of a fun exercise for you to do without using the reins really, although eventually you will, is to do some serpentini-like loops. And I'm on a loop to the left, so my left shoulder is back. Then I'm going to bring my right shoulder back and see if I can initiate the turn through Moshi's body with the position of my body. Now I want to go to the left, so I bring my left shoulder back and he turns to the left. Once again, thinking seat first, and then eventually we'll add legs and reins. But I want to experiment with how much I can influence the position of his body through the position of my body. My right shoulder's back because I'm on a curve to the right. And as I go to change direction, I bring my left shoulder back, and you see he automatically turned. And it's really fun for you to feel the power and influence of your body, the position of your body. You see, I bring my left shoulder back and he turns to the left. So those are the things that your seat and your body controls. So let's go to the next letter in the alphabet, which is your legs. Now your legs control, just like the position of your body controls the position of the horse's body, the position of your legs controls the position of the hind legs. In other words, if I wanted him to displace his hindquarters to the left or to the right in either a leg yield or a haunches in, which I'll show in a second, I would have one leg on the girth and one leg behind the girth to tell him to move his hindquarters sideways. The other thing that your legs do is they give aids. And I want to make the language very, very clear. Once again, it's important that you have one aid that means one and only one thing. And then when you want to say something different to your horse, you have another aid. And sometimes the difference between one aid and the other is very, very subtle. But there's enough of a difference so that the horse doesn't have to play multiple choice. Because if he has to decide, does she want me to pick up the canter, or does she want me to do a trot half pass? And those aids are very similar. There's just a slight difference. And he makes the wrong choice. The rider often thinks the horse is being disobedient, and the horse was not being disobedient. He was just confused, and it was left up to him to try to decide which aid you were talking about. So one aid means one and only one thing. When you want to do something completely different, you have at least one subtle variation in the combination of your aids. So let's talk about the leg aids. First of all, you have two legs, and when you think two legs, and specifically I'm talking about your calves here, when you think about closing your two calves, your two legs, you're basically saying to the horse, transition. Okay, so it could be transition from gait to gait, like from walk to trot, or even a transition from halt to walk or halt to trot. It also means another kind of transition, which is a transition within the gait. For example, from working trot to a trot lengthening, or working canter to a canter lengthening. Or when your horse is more advanced, it could be collected trot to medium trot, or collected canter to extended canter. But when you close your two legs, you're asking for transition. Sometimes, however, we use only one leg, the inside leg. Pretend that I'm circling to the right here, so my right calf, I would close my right calf as my inside leg. And once again, your legs command the hind legs. So the use of the inside leg all by itself has nothing to do with transitions. It just says to the horse, I want more energy, I want more activity in the gait that you're in. So you're in a walk, you're in a trot, you're in a canter, and you make a value judgment. You think, this is a little bit too lazy, this is a little bit too pokey, I want the walk or the trot or the canter to be brighter. That's the inner leg that you use, squeeze release with your calf on the girth. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier, when a leg comes behind the girth, it says to the horse, go sideways. And I have my leg behind the girth and I'm holding it there. This is subtly different from the leg aid that is a windshield wiper-like action, back and forth, which gives the aid for the horse to canter. And once again, it's very, very logical, cause and effect. If I wanted Moshi to pick up the left lead, he needs to strike off with the right hind leg because that's the first beat of the canter. The outside hind leg goes first, then we have the diagonal pair of inside hind, outside fore in order to end up with the left leg leading. If he were to strike off with his left hind leg first, I'd end up on the wrong lead. And so that's why we signal that right hind leg in order to move so that he ends up on the correct lead. So I'm going to demonstrate some of these aids for you. First, I'm going to do the displacement, using my legs to displace the hindquarters. And I'm going to do a leg yield. I'm actually going to do 2 leg yields first. I'm going to bring my right leg behind the girth, and I'm going to ask him to move his hindquarters to the left. And then I'm going to straighten him, and I'm going to bring my left leg behind the girth to ask him to displace his hindquarters to the right. These are leg yields. This is one form of a leg yield, and we'll do another entire lesson on leg yielding. By the same token, the position of my 2 legs can tell him to do something called haunches in, which is a little bit more advanced exercise. Because unlike the leg yield, the horse is bent around the inner leg. So I have my inner leg on the girth and my outer leg behind the girth, and he's now in haunches in. Now the mirror image of haunches in is something called renvers. And in this case, my right leg is on the girth and my left leg is on the girth, telling the hindquarters where I want them to go. So that's one of the things that your legs control, the position of the hind legs. And your legs, as I said earlier, also ask for activity within the gait. When you just use an inside leg, you're asking the gait to be more active. Now we have a pretty active walk right now, but I'm going to tighten my tummy muscles and make it too pokey. And then I'm going to say, this walk is too pokey. I want to make the walk brighter. I'm going to give one little squeeze. And because it's a little squeeze, I'm going to say the word now in order to make the walk brighter. Let's do that again. I'm going to slow him down with my tummy muscles. And then inner leg. Good boy. Okay, he overdid his reaction, which is okay. I don't mind that. We just have to refine the reaction. But I asked him to make his walk brighter from my inner leg. And there we go. And that was a good answer. Good boy, Moshi. So that's what the inner leg does. You're already in a walk, you're already in a trot, you're already in a canter, and you say, this is a little too pokey, I want to activate this gait. So you use your inside leg once on the girth, squeeze, release. Now the 2 legs asks for a transition. So I'm now going to press ever so lightly with my 2 calves and ask for a transition to the trot. And that was a good answer. Good boy, Moshi. And then I'm going to sit and use my retarding seat to bring him back to the walk. And now we're going to talk about the aid for the canter. I'm going to ask Moshi to pick up left lead canter in a moment by windshield wipering my right leg behind the girth. Then I'm going to show you an example of a different transition, a transition within the gait. I'm going to do working canter down this long side, and then I'm going to press with my 2 legs for a transition within the canter to ask him to do a lengthening of stride in the canter. So I signal the left lead canter to part by windshield, good boy, windshield wipering my right leg behind the girth. This is working canter. As I come into the long side, I'm going to press with my 2 legs and ask for a lengthening. And then tighten my tummy muscles to bring them back to working canter, and tighten my tummy muscles to do the down transition. As we continue with our alphabet, I now want to talk about the things that your reins control. Your reins control flexion at the pole, which is also called positioning at the pole, left or right. Your reins control flexion at the jaw, in. Your reins control the length of the horse's neck, and your reins control the position of the horse's forehand. That's everything from the saddle forward. So I'm going to talk about flexion to the left and flexion to the right first. Positioning left, positioning right. And it's very important. Sometimes it's harder to do the subtle things, the little things, than it is to do the bigger things. It's very important that when you do flexion left or right, it's a very tiny little action, and all we're doing is rotating the horse's head on the end of his neck. So we're going to get some terminology straight here. If I were to line up Moshe's neck straight in front of his body with his chin right in the middle crease of his chest, I'll call that 0 or neutral position. When I ask him to position himself or flex at the pole to the left like he is now, I'll call that, if I were tracking to the left, a +1 positioning. If I wanted him to flex to the right like he is now, and I were still tracking to the left, I would call that a -1 positioning. So when you ask for flexion either left or right, now I'm in left flexion, now I'm in right flexion, either a +1 or a -1, you don't want the neck to get involved. The neck stays straight in front of the horse's body. So that's flexion at the pole. Now I want to show you the action of my rein that creates that flexion. It's a very particular action. It's called an indirect rein aid. And with the indirect rein aid, if you want to just take a little close shot on my hand here, I'm going to turn my wrist so that my thumb, if I were circling to the right, my thumb would point toward the center of the circle, and my baby finger would come as close to the withers as possible without ever crossing over. Of course, we always use the reins independently on either side of the horse's neck. And in that moment where I turn my wrist, my fingernails or my knuckles point up toward my face. Now, I don't hold my hand in that position. It's a quick turn, release, turn, release. It's sort of like having a key in a door. Put your key in your door, you unlock the door, and then you end up once again with the thumb as the highest point of the hand. You start with the thumb as the highest point of the hand, you unlock the door, and then the thumb comes back to the highest point of the hand. And like I said, it's harder to do these subtle things than it is to do the big things. And horses tend to be more flexible in the neck than they are in the rest of the body. So when I'm turning the key, I need to support with the opposite rein. I need to have a marriage of inner and outer reins so that I just isolate the pole and either get flexion left or flexion right. Now that's flexion at the pole. The horse can also flex in the jaw. And this is something I don't often do with Moshe because he is a Frisian, and by nature they tend to be a little bit too closed at this angle here at the jaw. But I'm just going to demonstrate this so you know what it looks like, how to do it, and how not to do it. The action of the rein for flexion at the jaw is completely different than flexion at the pole. Basically, you squeeze and release on the rein. You see how he just closed himself up at the jaw angle? So some people call it squeezing and releasing, some people call it vibrating the rein, some people say twinkle, twinkle, twinkle on the rein, some people say it's a repetitive motion of squeezing water out of a sponge. But whatever you call it, basically what I'm doing is I'm moving the bit in the horse's mouth, and you see that he's chewing. When you move the bit in the horse's mouth, it encourages him to chew. When he chews, he flexes here at the jaw. Now, it's very, very important that you don't ever do that with two reins, which is like sawing on the horse's mouth, because if you go left, right, left, right, left, right, opening and closing your fingers, you can see what happens to his neck. His neck gets short, he closes this angle, it becomes too acute, he closes the angle too much, and basically you end up riding your horse from front to back instead of from back to front. So we never want to vibrate on two reins. There are times, and you'll see in future sessions, where we do vibrate one rein, but we never alternate squeezing and releasing on the two reins. Now here are some of the other two things that the reins control. The reins control the length of the horse's neck. Right now, I have a fairly short rein and Moshi has a short neck. If I were to allow him to have a medium length of rein, he would have a medium long neck. And if I were to ask him to have a very long rein, if I were to give him a very long rein, you see he has a very long neck. So it's pretty self-explanatory. The length of the reins determines the length of the horse's neck. The last thing that the reins control is the position of the horse's forehand, the position of his shoulders. And that, once again, is a completely different action on the reins. In order to control the position of the horse's shoulders, you think of shoulder in, left shoulder in or right shoulder in. You use your two arms as a unit, and you bring your two arms in the direction you want the shoulders to go. So if I wanted Moshi's shoulders to go to the right, I'd use an opening right rein. So my right arm would go to the right, my left arm would go to the right, the two arms as a unit would go to the right. And sometimes I like to think of it this way, especially in a shoulder in. I like to think that I bring my right hand to the right of my right hip, and my left hand comes as close to the withers as possible, but of course it never crosses over. The other thing you want to be sure, so that you bring the shoulders in and the shoulders stay level, the horse doesn't tip over onto one shoulder, is that when you displace the shoulders either to the right or to the left, your hands stay equidistant from your body. You don't bring one hand closer to your body like this. Otherwise, the horse's shoulders are not going to stay level. So I'm just going to demonstrate those different usages of the rein. The first thing I'm going to do is flexion at the pole, and I'm going to alternate between left flexion, which I have now, and right flexion, which is I'm calling a -1 flexion. And then I turn my wrist and I get left flexion, and then I turn my right wrist and support with the left rein and get right flexion. So flexion at the pole, either +1 or -1, is determined by the turn of the key and supporting with the opposite rein. Now, as I said before, I don't often flex Moshi in the jaw because he likes to be too closed in the jaw, but I'm going to purposely try to make him a little bit too open so you can see what happens when I vibrate the rein. So I have to put him in that position that he doesn't normally go in, where the jaw angle is too open. And then I'm going to vibrate on my left rein, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, and you see he closes the angle at the jaw. Now let's talk about the length of the reins. Remember, the length of the reins determines the length of the horse's neck. And right now I have a semi-short rein, and I have a semi-short neck. And now I'm going to let the reins out a little bit. And Moshi has a medium long neck. And then I'm going to let the reins out even more. And he chews the reins out of my hand, and he goes with a very long neck. The length of the rein determines the length of the horse's neck. Now, the last thing was the position of the forehand. And I'm going to show you, since we haven't done a lot of warm-up, I don't really want to do shoulder in, but I'm going to show you how you can control the position of the shoulders, the position of the forehand, by doing an exercise I call a box. I'm going to make a large box with 4 corners. And I'm going to swivel Moshi's shoulders around the corners as I make the box. Now, in order to help me have control over his shoulders, I'm going to ride him through this entire exercise in counter flexion, -1 flexion, and then for a corner, I'm going to bring my 2 arms to the left, and then I'm going to go straight forward again, but I am going to keep him in the -1 flexion, and then 2 arms to the left, and you see his shoulders swivel to the left. This is how we turn the shoulders of the horse, or displace the shoulders where you want them to go. And this is very important as part of your turning aid, because some of you may know if you try to turn your horse simply by pulling on the inside rein, sometimes the horse's whole body can drift to the outside like that. So we never just turn the horse with the inside hand. We turn the horse's shoulders, and if we turn the horse's shoulders, the rest of the body follows. And now I'm going to do a change of direction. I'm going to counterflex him to the left, and I'm going to spin his shoulders to the right by turning the two shoulders to the right and bringing my two arms to the right. Right arm to the right of my right hip. Left hand as close to the withers as possible without crossing over. This is a good suppleness of the shoulder exercise, and it's a good exercise for the rider to practice turns by turning the horse's shoulders, not by turning the horse's face and letting the horse's body fall the other way. Good. And turn the shoulders left, change flexion, turn the shoulders right, and tighten my tummy, and ho, good boy. So, it's very important that you do know these letters of the alphabet, because these are the letters that we're going to put together to form words. And remember, there will be, a lot of the aids are very similar, like aids for bend and aids for half pass and aids for canter depart. They're very similar, but there's always at least one subtle variation in the use of the aids, so that one combination of aids means one and only one thing, and then when you combine your aids slightly differently, you're saying something different to your horse. And therefore, there's no confusion, and your horse doesn't have to play multiple choice.